When I look back over my life, I realize I was very fortunate to know and rub shoulders with some rather amazing people. You will find the Lucas family from the Crow community outside of Reynolds at the top of my list. Mr. Cincinnatus Lucas and his wife Sarah were simply wonderful folks. Mr. Nat, as he was called, never had to worry about whether a financial institution would foreclose on his home. He never had a mortgage. In fact, he lived all his life in the house his father built when he married his mama. He was never concerned about airport delays or whether an airline was going to charge extra for checked luggage. In his 100 years and 6 months on this earth, Mr. Nat Lucas meant it as a young man at the wedding altar when he said, "Till death do us part." He was married to his one woman, Sarah, for 67 years until she died in 1989. Mr. Nat spent almost his entire life farming land that had been in his family since the Civil War days. Like most of the farmers in the well-to-do Crow community outside of Reynolds, Georgia, he was good at it. A man growing up in the late 1800s and early 1900s didn't have a lot of educational opportunities, but that never stopped him from learning. He consumed newspapers and kept up with news on television with great interest throughout his years. He had a great memory, and his neighbors and visitors were amazed at his incredible recall of people and their stories that happened years earlier. If there was ever a steward of the land, it was him. Among other things, he grew corn, cotton, peaches, pimento, and pepper. He also raised cattle, hogs, and chickens, and he made a lot of money along the way. Mr. Nat also served as Justice of the Peace for 40 years, and as you might imagine, he was an avid fisherman and hunter. Mr. and Miss Nat Lucas also raised children, and they did that incredibly well, too. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters, and all ended up to be successful citizens. As you would expect, those children produced more children, and so did their children, and the Lucas tree keeps growing. Thankfully, I knew all 4 of their children and also several of their grandchildren. Sadly, the 3 oldest children, Nat Jr., Sarah, and Mac, are deceased now. The only one still here is Peggy, and she is my guest today. Peggy will talk a bit about what it was like to be raised by Nat and Sarah Lucas. She will also show us the wonderful way of life she experienced. We cannot go back to how it used to be, but if you let your mind wander a little, you may want to go back after hearing this. Your heart will be stirred as you begin to see this picture unfold. Peggy has never been married, but she has a group of nieces and nephews and children of nieces and nephews who look after her well these days. There's something special about a 92-year-old Peggy Lucas, speaking from her heart. Wisdom flows from her like a gentle river.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast. I've got an old friend with me. She says she's old. Physically, she's 92 years old, but boy, she's young at heart, I can tell you that. And I was just talking to her as we were getting ready to do this. I'm not far behind her. Peggy, when I got married, you were not but 45 years old, so I've known you a long time. I know that. And thank you for being on here.
You're welcome.
I'm tickled to death. I want to start just talk a little bit. I knew your parents, and as a young man and as a kid growing up, you had amazing parents. So just talk a little bit about what it was like being the youngest child of Nat and Sarah Lucas.
Well, it was interesting. I was the baby, of course, and I got teased a lot because I got things that my older siblings didn't get. You know, like, for instance, I got a bicycle for Christmas one year, and they had never gotten a bicycle. So they were, not jealous. I'm sure they were a little jealous, but we never had any problems about it. We lived in the country. Everybody was farmers, and none of us were rich, had very much money, but Mom and Daddy provided for us, and we had a good life. Didn't know we were poor because everybody else in the community was poor. So we just had a good life.
Well, you lived through the Depression, too, so you lived through all of that. Yeah, your daddy, if I remember right, he was over 100 when he died, and he lived in the same house his entire life. His daddy built that house, right?
Yes, he did.
Lived in the same place forever, and we'll talk about them more. But I want to go back and let's talk a little bit about when I look at today's world. I turn on the TV, I turn on the computer, you do the same thing. You think about what in the world has changed since even I grew up, and even you, it would be even more. So let's start talking about, just so younger people listening to this can get in your head. When you were a kid, talk about your transportation. How did y'all get, what kind of vehicle did you have? Did you have a vehicle? You just said you got a bicycle at some point in your life. Talk about how you got to where you were going and what transportation was like. It's so much different today, for sure.
Oh, yes. Daddy had a truck, and that was our transportation. Of course, we rode the school bus to school back and forth. And when I was at grammar school, a lot of times we would walk to school because it was probably less than a mile.
Right. It may have been less than a mile, but it had to be close to a mile, right? It was not just across the street.
Was.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know where it is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you have any remembrance before he had the truck? You don't go back that far, do you?
No, I don't remember back that far. Sure
Okay.
don't. But later, he bought a large truck. And then the first car I remember us having was a black Pontiac that he bought from can't remember the man's name in Roberta. Slade, somebody named Slade. Anyway, he bought that, and that was the first car I remember us having.
So you rode around in a truck. You had 3 siblings, so he had a wife and 4 kids. You had a pickup truck. So talk about your communication. That's one thing that has changed so much. Talk about telephones, for instance, when you were growing up. Did you have a phone there? Would you have a party line? Or tell me how that worked.
We did. We had a phone on the wall, and you would call somebody, and you would know what either they had too short or too long, or one short and one long ring. And so you could hear, the people who they were calling. You
had what was called party lines. You could hear other people talking if you picked it up too, right?
Yeah, you could pick up and listen.
Yeah.
I remember one time there was Mr. Parr had a store, and somebody kept listening, and he knew they were listening. And he said, "I wish whoever it is would please stop listening." And so the next day or so, Miss Belle Mosley went up there, and she said, "Now, Emory," said, "I hope you don't think that was me listening."
She gave herself away, did she?
Uh-huh. She did.
That's great. Yeah.
You could tell when somebody picked up and was listening, But anyway.
That reminds me, Peggy, that when I heard this story when I was a kid, somebody cheated on a test. They didn't know which guy it was that was looking on the other paper, so they gave them both a test together, just those two. And whatever the question was, one guy wrote, "I don't know," and the other one wrote, "I don't either." so it kind of gave it away, right? I know you're very good at all the communication stuff. You got email, you got text, you got cell phones. You could take a phone wherever you were. You didn't live in a world like that at all, right?
No, oh no. I remember the first portable phone we had. Mama had been sick, and we wanted her to have a phone with her at all times, and so we got a portable phone.
Right. So she could have the phone close to her that wasn't hanging on the wall, right?
Right, exactly. And by that time, we had got, the rotary phones, too. So
another thing that a lost art is handwritten letters. When you communicated, you certainly wasn't calling people long distance. You wrote letters to people, so that means that when you wrote a letter, it would be at least a week before they got it, and if they wrote you right back, it'd be another week, so you wouldn't hear for 2 weeks. Talk about that. I think that's a lost art. Nobody handwrites hardly anything anymore.
It is a lost art, and I think about that a lot of times, and I write thank you notes, and I send cards, and I write on them, but it's just a whole different world now. Do things there's so much technology, and it's quick to sit down and write an email, but I think it means more if you get something that's handwritten.
That's really true. It's rare now. You go get the mail and you open a letter and somebody has a handwritten letter, you're going to sit down and read the letter. And you're going to appreciate the time they took to do it. On an email, you may skim it, you may delete it in 2 seconds, and you move on. And I think that's not only the lost art of writing the letters, but just the use of handwritten letters. Folks, if there's anything we can learn, we ought to do more of that. We ought to be like Peggy and write cards, write letters. People appreciate it. It's more personal. And boy, that has changed big time. So I'm sure your first memories, you guys listened to the radio before TV became popular, right? You remember those days?
Oh, yes, we did. We had a radio, and we could listen. And the first thing not the first thing, but one thing I remember that we heard was when President Roosevelt died.
Right.
And we heard that on the radio. I don't think we even got a newspaper at that time.
The only news you got from the outside world was what you could hear on the radio, right?
Right.
And now you are bombarded with more news than you can possibly keep up with. Do you think that's good or bad?
I just think sometimes we get too much information, and we don't know whether it's true or not.
Yep, that's really true.
There's too much talk about each other, when they get on the news, and it's just not pleasant to watch anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you. I hardly ever watch the news anymore. I get sick of the going back and forth, the division and all that. I'm the same way. So, but going back to radio, do you remember listening to being entertained by like radio shows that you would listen to, like the Lone Ranger or whatever, just the entertainment? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we listened to, it was a soap opera, Stella something, and I can't remember that. And we would listen to different, things that were on the radio that were of interest to us, but Daddy always wanted us to listen to the news, We did that, but we did listen to other things, that they had on there.
Was that Stella Dallas?
Yes, Stella Dallas.
Yeah.
And we always listened to that, and I don't know why. I don't even remember now what it was all about.
I'm just thinking what's interesting, we started, of course, that was before my time. In my lifetime, we had TVs. They wasn't very good. We'll talk about that in a minute. You didn't get many channels, and it was fuzzy and stuff. But now people are listening to us talk, and they just riding down the road listening to us and not watching. So it's kind of gone full circle. That's interesting.
It is. It really is. I said we have so many channels on the television you can't watch, and you have to record, and I've got a bunch recorded that I probably will never watch.
At 92, most people don't even know how to record. You do amazing stuff. I was talking to David. He says you're the go-to person in their family to teach them how to do social media and computer problems and Facebook and all that. You're the go-to person in the family. So that's pretty cool right there. Let's go back to television. You just said something that's really true. When you finally got a TV, talk about what you experienced with the TV. Just talk a little bit about, I'm sure you were, wow, this is amazing. You can watch this, but talk a little bit about how hard it was to watch it and what you could watch.
Well, sometimes you could, the reception wasn't real good, and sometimes, so Daddy finally bought an antenna that you could turn so it would go in the direction that the television program was coming from. Like he always liked to watch the news from Columbus. He could, turn that antenna and it would get better reception and they could just stop it. And where it was, we always watched the Lawrence Welk show, and Daddy loved to watch the wrestling and the baseball games.
Right.
I said he was coaching from his lounging chair.
Yeah, you know, back then it was a game of the week. You only came on one day a week on TV, and but it's definitely changed. Not only the physical TV, but you remember you're talking about the antenna. So for folks younger listening, some people had the electronic things that sat on the TV, and you could turn the knob, and the antenna would move. But most of my experience, that never worked. And you had to go outside, and somebody be yelling to you, turn it a little bit more, you're good. All right, now we got it. So people go out and physically move the antenna, right?
Right.
And now you plug into cable or you're on internet, and it's wireless. That just blows your mind right there for sure.
I know it does, and it does. And I said, as I said in the book, I never thought that we would be able to talk on the phone and see each other. And I remember commenting when somebody said something about that. I said, well, I hope that never happens. I wouldn't want to be talking, them see me some days.
Well, we're in that world, so you got to be careful when somebody's doing one of those FaceTime calls. You better be ready or not answer it.
That's right.
Yeah, that's true.
Or either I turn the screen the other way.
You're listening to 92-year-old Peggy Lucas. There's much more coming here. We'll be right back. You're talking about the fuzziness of the screen back then on the TV. It also, you'd have the horizontal hold and the vertical hold. You'd have to go adjust the buttons all the time. You remember it start rolling and stuff. You'd have to get up and go move it. Yeah, all that is different. Another thing that is different, and especially where you grew up, Peggy, is your life revolved around the church. And your faith was extremely important to you. Talk a little bit about that impact growing up.
Well, we only had one church to go to because we lived in the country and couldn't just jump in the car and go. So we went to Crowell, and I went to Sunday school there and to Bible school, and they had all of the things, for us to participate in. We enjoyed that, and we knew everybody there because we all were such a close-knit community.
Sure.
But
your life pretty much revolved around the church, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that has certainly changed.
Oh, yes.
Life revolves around the church for a few people, but for the majority, that's way down the list these days, right?
Exactly.
Does that bother you when you think about the way you grew up and the way kids are growing up now? Do you ever think about that?
I do. I really do. And I think about, I have two great nephews, and I think about what kind of world will they have, with all the crime and all the bad things that happen. And I just think, oh, Lord, protect them.
Yeah. So that brings another question. When you were growing up, did you ever lock your door?
No, we never locked the door.
No.
But now, we left all the windows open, and because we didn't have air conditioning then, doors were never locked. But we never went anywhere and just voluntarily went in the house. We would always knock or blow the horn or something. And
that brings another question. There was a lot of front porch sitting in those days, right? And visiting with people. Talk about that a little bit, Peggy, of how you visited people. And that's, again, you didn't, as you said, you didn't go bombard somebody and go in somebody's house when they were not expecting you, but you would pull up in the yard or honk the horn or knock on the door, and there was a lot of people sitting on the porch shelling peas and having great conversations and laughter. Just talk about your memories of that.
Yes, I remember Mama would say, we got to hurry up and finish what we need to do today, and so we can go sit with somebody, a neighbor. and visit. We would do that quite often, or either go after our night meal, just visit and sit on the porch and rock, and they would do the same thing, come to our house. And it was just a whole different world. And I live in a retirement community, and we don't do that much. You're very careful about, because some people want to be by themselves and some don't. So I always call before I go see somebody and be sure it's, okay.
What happened, I think, during those times, these lifelong bonds were built because of all the conversations and all the memories you have of sitting with people. These friendships go back generations, and that has been very important in your life, right? I mean, you've got friends, a lot of them. I'm going to talk about your graduating class from high school in just a minute, but a lot of your friends have gone, but you grew up with all these lifelong friends, and it was not just a casual friendship. You knew each other well because of the time you spent together for many years, right?
Exactly. And I remember growing up, my best friend was Betty.
Betty Pierce, yep.
And she married a Navy chaplain, and I would go and visit with them, because she would always invite me. And I remember one time her daddy wanted me to take her. I was going to see her in Chicago, and her daddy wanted me to take some scuppernongs. So I had these scuppernongs in a bag, in another bag, and carried them in my lap with her.
Were you on a plane? Airplane?
Yeah, I was flying.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So talk about, you mentioned scuppernongs. It just made me remember family gatherings around the table and eating together was a huge deal growing up, right?
Oh, yes. You always, ate together. This one didn't eat this time or another time or come in late or whatever. We always ate at the same time.
And you surely didn't go out to eat, right? You didn't go to the parties or somewhere.
No, we didn't. We didn't go out to eat. There was no place to go.
Right.
Unless we went to Reynolds or Butler, but we never did that. We just didn't go out to eat. We would have fried chicken and butter beans and corn and sliced tomatoes and cornbread and maybe biscuits, because Mama would make chicken gravy, and we'd have rice, and those were some of my favorite meals. But I always thought Mama could make the best Japanese fruitcake, and in later years, Mac and Nat both made them, and they didn't quite come up to Mama's, but they were almost.
They tried, right?
They tried. And they did succeed in making them and all. And a lot of times when we were going to get together, after, my siblings married and all, they would bring a dish, and then, Mom and I would do the rest. I guess that was covered dish.
So, again, think about the way it is now. I don't think many families, everybody's on the go. So one person, like you said, you don't eat at the same time. Somebody looks in the refrigerator, grabs something to eat, sitting around a table, the conversations that happened, not only the great food you had, and that you're talking about fresh butter beans. These are not frozen or canned, I can promise you. And you grew them, but the wonderful meals, but more the wonderful fellowship and the bonds that were created between your siblings. We're missing that a little bit today, too, wouldn't you say?
Yes. You don't have those big family meals anymore. You say, well, let's go out to eat, But back then, we couldn't do that. Now, you can go anywhere, and a lot of people don't even cook much.
And I don't think we're better for it either. I think it's part of what we see in the decline in society, that those things that were so important then are not important now.
No, and I remember when we went to church, we would say, come go home with us and eat. And, we didn't think anything about it. But people don't do that now. They'll say, well, let's go to Janine's, or let's go to S&S or Cracker Barrel or something, They don't invite you into their homes to eat like we used to, as much as we did.
For sure. The other thing that you mentioned at the beginning, that you knew that you didn't have much money. You lived through the Depression. Your dad was a very successful farmer, but those were different times. But one thing that you did, I know, is you didn't know what credit was. Your dad, he didn't have credit cards to go out and buy for stuff he didn't have the money to pay for. Talk a little bit about that.
That's right. He didn't. And I know he would go to that warehouse, Watley's warehouse, and he would get fertilizer and whatever. And as soon as he got the crop sold or whatever, he was peaches or peppers or whatever, that he wanted to go right then and pay for it.
Right.
He did not want to owe anybody. And I remember, I can't talk about this, but I remember me saying to my sister, I said, when he died, I said, we've got to go pay Bruce because Daddy would want us to do that now. And we did. And we grew up with that same principle that we don't owe people, money. I pay my bills on time, and I'm thankful that we can do that now. But back then you couldn't. And I know when he would sell the cotton and all, he would pay whatever he owed at that time. And they did, have a running tab of what he was buying. And when the crop came in, they were paid.
Well, everybody had to do that. That's the way everybody operated. We operated like that at the grocery store, the same way.
Right.
What you didn't have was credit cards just to go out to buy something that you want, and you didn't have the money to pay for it, which we see today. I mean, obviously, people are in debt up to their necks. I've been in debt in my life, I can promise you that, but not now, but I have been, and most people can't live for the bondage they're in with the debt they're in, right?
That's right, exactly. And I learned that principle, and my siblings did too.
Right. Another thing that you mentioned in your book, and by the way, we talk about a book. Peggy did a book that somebody did. I think they asked you questions or recorded you, and they made a book out of it, My Life Story. She sent me a copy of it just to ask her to send this to me so I could see some of the stuff she talked about and what she did. I obviously know this family well. I go back a long way, so some of this stuff stirred my thinking. So that's the book we're talking about. But you mentioned the stories of, you remember, especially with your mother, that you looked after your neighbors. You did when somebody was ill or somebody was in need, you looked after them, and not just your family, but your neighbors, these people you rocked on porches with, and that's not happening much now either. So talk about what your memories are of that, Peggy.
Like I said in the book, if somebody was sick or in need, Mama would always go and take something. And when we would kill hogs in the wintertime, she always shared with the neighbors, and the neighbors always shared with us. And we didn't think about whether they needed it or not. Mom and Daddy just took it to them, and they would bring it to us. So
everybody just looked after each other, right?
They did. They really did.
Folks, you're listening to Peggy Lucas. You don't want to miss what she has to say. Don't even think about touching that pause button.
As I said in the book, Mama would go and sit with Miss Sally Mae because she had asthma so bad. And she would sit with her all night because she couldn't breathe, and they didn't have oxygen then. And so she'd struggle to breathe, and Mama would sit there with her. Yeah,
I remember stories about her, and I think it was Tommy prayed before he went to school one day that his mother would be alive when he got home because she was struggling so much to breathe. When he was a kid, she did. She lived a long time after that, but that prayer changed his life because when he got back, she was better, and he was a believer ever since. You remember that story?
Yes, I do remember. I sure do.
So another thing, let's talk about we call patriotism. You grew up with very patriotic family. They had love of country. when the flag was raised, they stood and put their hand over the heart. Just talk about your memories of that.
It distresses me when I look at television and somebody is burning our flag. We were taught to respect it and to respect our country, but a lot of people don't do that anymore. They're not proud of their country, and there are a lot of things not to be proud about it. I remember in school we would always have an opening prayer. We would do the Pledge of Allegiance. We would help each other in school, with our homework or whatever.
And everybody would, when you do the pledge, everybody would stand and put the hand over the heart. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk about this whole thing. You just mentioned you would help each other in school and all that. There's a lot of what appears to be a lot of hate in people. There's no middle ground. People on opposite sides as division. And let's talk a little bit about decency. You grew up in an environment, in a time where people may have different opinions, but they were decent people. They illustrated decency in their life. Talk about what you saw as decency of people when you were growing up, Peggy.
Well, I always thought, everybody was honest. You didn't deceive anybody. And what they saw was what you were. And you were always very careful to be a lady and a gentleman when you were in school or in church or wherever. I know when we would go to church, you didn't misbehave because you knew you were going to get that look if we were not sitting with our parents. But people just don't, they're just different this day and time. Some people don't have good morals, and it's just a different world.
For sure. I'm going to go back to you talking about when you were in school and you helped each other with homework or whatever and doing the pledge. You graduated from Reynolds High School in 1948. I guess you were 16 years old. I guess you went 11 years back in those days, right?
We did, and I started school when I was 5.
Okay. So you started at 5, and you started out in the Crow community, but eventually went to Reynolds High School and graduated. And I think I saw on a note you sent me that of your graduating class, I think there were 14 of you in that class. You're the only one living, right?
Right.
And how does that make you feel, Peggy?
Sometimes it makes me feel real old, and then sometimes I don't think about being old. I said age is just a number. I just don't think about being old. There are a lot of things I can't do now. I can't do like I used to, but I keep trying.
You've done well, and the truth is God's blessed you. He's not ready to take you. And not only are you 92 years old, but your mind is as good as mine. And I can tell you a lot of people a lot younger than you are still walking around and breathing, but their mind is gone. So you have been blessed. I think you got that gene from your dad that lived to be 100. You got more years left. How old was your mother when she died? 89 or something?
She was 89. She would have been 90 in December.
Yeah, I didn't miss it far, did I?
No, you didn't.
So you got this, the neat part is your mind. And that brings me that what's amazing about you is you're 92 years old, you live in a retirement community, but you're computer literate. You got a cell phone and a wall phone, or house phone, you're on Facebook, you understand, you communicate with people on Facebook. How'd you learn all that? I mean, most people your age hasn't even tried to do that.
Well, I remember the first computer at work, and I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown, but learning it because it was so different from the handwritten bookkeeping, and it was so much to learn and all, and I thought, I can do this, and I did. I learned it, and I was in the process of getting contacts at that time, and I thought, well, I'm surely going to just can't do this, but I could, and I did, and I've enjoyed that, and my Sunday school class, they call me and they'll say, Peggy, so-and-so, ask me a question, and one girl will call me a lot when we were COVID, right, housebound, and we would watch live stream. Our church started a live stream, right, and she would call me and she'd say, Peggy, I can't get on, and I would say, well, do so-and-so, and she would do it, and she would be on. And so they tell me in the Sunday school class I'm the technician.
You are. You're a technical wizard to be 92 years old and do what you do on social. I see you post on social media. You know what you're doing. You know, some people post and they post the same thing 8 times and don't realize they posted, but you're very good at it. And because of that, you can keep up with the outside world. You know what's going on in people's life. There's a lot to be said bad about social media, that is for sure. And we've talked a little bit about that because of all the hate. There's so much information and all that, but there's a lot good about it too, that somebody like you can keep up with people like me that you wouldn't normally see, right?
Exactly. And I said, now we're getting so many ads on Facebook, and I got on there so I could keep up with my friends that I don't see, and with their children, grandchildren, and it's gotten to be not as, I won't say as much fun, but you get all these ads and you have to delete all them.
That's true. That's true. I want to go back. You got 3 siblings. They're all deceased, and I knew all of them. And you've got some of their kids that you're very close to today. But first, you never were married, but
No.
you were very close to your siblings. So just talk about your siblings. I know you miss them desperately, and you were all such a close-knit family.
My older brother left to go, it was wartime, and he was going to work in a wartime factory in Flushing, New York. He got married during that time. He moved back to Marietta. Well, he lived in Thomaston, I think, at one time, and worked for Dr. Pepper. And then he went to, moved to Marietta, where his wife was from, and went to work for a coffee distributor. Can't think of the name of it now. My sister was next, and she worked at the Pontiac dealer here, and she's about to have a baby, so she said, why don't you come and go to work here? And she had the baby, and I went to work there and worked for 46 years.
Yep, yes, that was you. I was meant to bring that up because you had a full career working for the Pontiac dealership in Macon, right?
I did. I surely did. Then Mac had, he joined the Merchant Marine during the wartime, and he was on ship, and he went to all these interesting places, and he was married to his wife, Dot.
My point of getting you to talk about them is that you came from this family that was living in the country, didn't have a lot. You lived off the land. God, church, family, friendships was very, very important. And these people turned out to be incredible people and very successful people. And Peggy is one of them. But even the kids of your siblings are all great folks. They just don't come any better. And the other thing they do, Peggy, is they look after you. You're in contact with them, especially the local ones. You hear from them almost daily, right?
I do. And Nat's daughter lives in Adairsville, and she has some health problems. But let's see, I think it was when I fell this last time, she sends me an email every day. And she tells me what's going on in their life, and because we don't see them that much. I said, I'm thankful that we all came to know the Lord. He's been an important part in all of our lives. He has blessed us all with, successful jobs and careers and whatever. And so I'm thankful for that.
Well, you have a lot to be thankful for, but the whole story, and I knew we would come in here, and why I wanted to have you on is the investments that your parents made in you and your siblings paid off. They had no idea. They could not see into the future what all of them would do, but the greatest thing you see them doing is still looking after each other and looking after you and this close-knit family group that you have. Everybody doesn't have that, Peggy. There are a lot of aunts that are sitting in places like you that rarely hear from the people that they wish they would hear from or they need to hear from. But because of what was instilled in you guys, and they instilled it in their kids, it lives on, and it's going to keep on living on. And it's what a powerful, powerful statement, and what a powerful, powerful truth. Don't you agree?
I do. I surely do. I said I had some bird feeders, and they said, you don't go out on that patio by yourself. And so they come by and feed my birds and, clean out the bird bath so that I can enjoy what I used to.
Amazing.
And it is amazing. And, if they had gotten in the last few months, if I have to go to the doctor, they take me. And I said, I can go by myself. They said, no, we're going to go with you. And so that means a lot.
Well, bless your heart and bless them. But they got it honestly. I can tell you that. They got that looking after you honestly based on the story we just told about your family. And thank God for your parents. Thank God for your siblings. And thank God for those younger generation that is looking after their aunt or great aunt.
Right.
Great. What a wonderful story. We're going to wrap this up, but I'll ask you two questions. One, what worries you the most about young folks today and the future generations that, based on what we just talked about, what worries you?
It worries me that a lot of the young people are not interested in going to church. They're not interested in what's happening there. And I will say this, I go to Ingleside Baptist, and we have a lot of young people. And I know another church in town, they don't have hardly any young people going. And they used to have them, but I think they just don't go to church like they should. Uh-huh. And I'm thankful, though, that my great niece is taking her children to church, and they know who Jesus is, and it's important in their lives.
So you worry more about the spiritual, where we're going spiritually as a country, as a generation. That worries you the most, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I want to ask you one more question. People are going to listen to this, Peggy, after you and I are long gone, and that's why I'm recording it. We're going to have your voice. You've got your book, but we're going to have your voice talking about these things, and they're going to listen to this after you and I both are gone, and they're going to hear your voice. What do you want your family, especially your family that is listening to this, what do you want them to remember about Peggy Lucas?
Oh, my goodness. Well, that I love them, and I appreciated all they've done for me, and to keep going on the right path and give their lives, if they haven't, as they come along, to Jesus, that they would do that they would come to know him and depend on him, and it will enrich their lives.
Well, you've depended on him a long time, and it's worked out pretty well for you, right?
Exactly.
I guarantee you.
Exactly.
Peggy, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for doing this. This is so powerful.
And I'm sorry I get so emotional.
I'm glad you did. I want them to hear just how you feel about it. I think that's perfect. That's perfect. It's outstanding. Thank you, Peggy. Thank you, dear.
Thank you.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.